Hello everyone, it's a great pleasure to welcome you all to our webinar today to discuss a very interesting topic, that is renewable energy integration, the next big challenge for India. The event is organized by Institute of Energy Economics and Financial Analysis IEEFA and GMK Research. IEEFA is a leading think tank that analyzes issues related to energy markets, trends and policies. GMK Research is a boutique research and consulting firm that focuses on three key segments: renewables, electric mobility and battery storage. Quickly on the format of the webinar. The webinar will consist of interactive discussion with our eminent speakers, followed by question answer session. At the end, we will have 15 minutes for question answer session. Participants are welcome to submit their questions in the question answer box at the bottom of the webinar window. Now on the agenda, quickly a brief backdrop before we discuss on the agenda today. So as of January 31st, 2021, India has about 93 gigawatt of on-grid variable renewable energy installed in India. Central Electricity Authority, that is CEA, projects that this capacity is going to reach 450 gigawatt by 2030. And that will contribute for more than 50% of the total installed capacity of India. International Energy Agency, that is IEA, also has recently in its India Energy Outlook for 2021 predicts that by 2040, the India's RE capacity will reach 900 gigawatt. And with such growing share of large-scale variable renewable energy capacity, it is imperative to understand the implications this will have on the grid. So in this backdrop for today's discussion, key questions for which we would like to get the answers from our expert speakers are, with growing share of RE, what impact it is going to have on India's existing transmission infrastructure, role of flexible operation of coal-fired power plants in grid integration, how could standalone battery energy storage solutions help India address this kind of a challenge, success case studies on hydrogen projects across the globe, and what the opportunity lies for India market, what kind of policy interventions are needed to manage this. And to take on the discussions today, we have a very interesting set of industry experts with us. We have Mr. Rupam Raja, Marketing Director, India and Southeast Asia from Fluence Energy. We have Mr. Farrukh Amir, EVP Policy Advocacy, Sterlite Power. We have Mr. Yongliang, Finance Analyst, IEEFA. We have Mr. Kashish, Shah, Energy Finance Analyst from IEEFA. Thank you everyone to be part of this discussion today. It's an honor to present you. Now, without taking much time, we would like to start with Kashish first, who will present the key highlights from a very comprehensive report on this topic that has recently been released by IEEFA. Kashish, over to you.
Thank you, Jyoti. Thanks for joining us. Let me just share my screen and my presentation. So, is my presentation visible to everyone on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Jyoti. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining. Today, I'm going to talk about some of the key findings of my latest report, which focuses on some of the key technology solution for grid integration for large-scale variable renewable for India as it tries to transition towards a cleaner power system. So my report and the presentation essentially will focus on three key areas: flexible operation of coal-fired power plants, battery storage, and green hydrogen. So the objective of this presentation is to discuss the technology and the policies that would incentivize capital investment into some of these important areas of technology. And also I review some of the global developments across these technologies, economies such as Australia, China, Europe, and USA, as they have massive cross learnings for the Indian renewable energy rich states. So without any further ado, let's get cracking. So why we need integration, why we need to think about grid integration of large scale variable renewable energy. So as Jyoti said that, you know, we are right now at 93 gigawatts of installed capacity in terms of in front of the meter renewable energy. And the ambition is to build 450 gigawatt of capacity by 2030. So from 93 gigawatt, we are looking at the Himalayan peak. This would require 35 gigawatt of annual capacity additions for the next decade. And then IEA has further gone into this projection and suggests that this capacity could be further doubled by 2040 to 900 gigawatts. So clearly, I mean, there is momentum with renewable energy. Just when we were trying to comprehend the lowest solar tariff of rupees 2.636 per unit, now we have a tariff of rupees below 2 per unit in India. So the momentum is clearly, the price economics is with renewable energy. All we need and all we can hope for is an accelerated pickup in energy demand or electricity demand. And we want the government to stay on track with their ambition. So why do we need to think about grid integration? So before that, I think it's important to look at what's happening in the world and how some of the global energy economies or power markets are transitioning. And we would look at some of the leaders, such as Germany, which had 46% of its total electricity coming from renewables last year. We have penetration of 36% in the Californian electricity market. And for South Australia, the penetration was 60%. This is mind-boggling for a state which had blackouts 3-4 years ago. Now the transition has been so fast that they have 60% penetration of renewable energy into their electricity system. And India currently has 10% of renewable energy penetration. And according to CEA's estimation from their optimal generation mix, this could go up to about 32% from solar and wind in the coming decade. So when we talk about the transition and integration of large-scale variable renewable energy, the most primary example that I could think of is the duck curve challenge. So I'd probably take only 20 seconds to explain this, the duck curve challenge. So let's just think of an electricity system with just two generation sources, solar and thermal. So during the afternoon hours when solar is available in abundance and it's cheap, we will need the thermal power to back down its generation. So there is a dip in thermal generation during the afternoon hours. And as the solar dips during the evening hours, we will need this thermal generation to ramp up to serve the increasing demand. And also again, during the nighttime, this demand will dip, and then that's how the demand for thermal generation will also dip. And this dynamic of dip and then rise in the net load is what gives the net load generation curve a shape of a duck. So let's start with some of the key three topics that we want to discuss today. The emergence of renewable energy, the emergence of ultra cheap renewable energy has now made the concept of base load redundant. We don't need thermal as a base load. In my opinion, efficient and flexible utilization of its already existing 206 gigawatt of coal-fired fleet will be an important technology avenue for India to explore some of these grid integration challenges. So let's talk about what is flexible operation for coal-fired power plants. So we need to discuss some of the key parameters that decide how flexible a coal-fired power plant is. So number one is the minimum thermal load. So let's say we have a 200 megawatt plant, and if it could only operate at least it could operate at 120 megawatt, then we would say the minimum thermal load is 60% for a power plant. So the minimum thermal load is just illustrative of when there is cheap sources available on the grid, how much a thermal power plant can back down. And also looking into other parameters, it's the reverse. How fast can it ramp up when the supply from other renewable sources dip into the grid? So it needs to ramp down quickly, it needs to ramp up quickly. And also there is something called a startup and shutdown time. So in certain instances, the power plant will have to be completely switched off for grid stability purposes or availability of abundance, ultra cheap renewable sources. So there is a cold start and there is a hot start. So hot start would be if the plant's shut for about 8 hours, and then if it has to switch on, that would be a hot start. And a cold start would be if the plant is switched off for about 48 hours, and then if it has to be turned on. So the flexibility for coal-fired power plants obviously comes at a cost. Depending on the size, age, and the technology of the power plant, there would be retrofits required, and that would incur capital expenditure on the power plant. And also operating these power plants flexibly will have some impact on the operational and maintenance expenditure. The major chunk of this operational and maintenance cost would come from the change in heat rates and the losses that the plant would incur in the form of heat rates as its generation fluctuates from low to its normal load. CEA and NTPC, they have made this analysis and they've translated this cost into what would be the additional tariff for these thermal power plants to operate flexibly. So depending on the size of the plant, these tariffs could vary from 2.15 to rupees 2.40 per kilowatt hour. And as smaller the plant is, it would be cheaper to operate it flexibly. Again, this is a bit of a messy table, but I'll try and explain this in a way that it serves the purpose of comparing these various sources of technology for grid integration. So as I said, the plants have to operate at minimum load. It's expensive, and sometimes these plants would have to be shut off as well. So when these plants are shut off for, let's say, hard coal, the coal-fired power plants, for a cold start, it would take about 7 hours. For a hot start, it would take about 3 hours for the plants to turn on. But batteries could do that in less than 1 second. Mr. Rupam Raja will elaborate more on this one, as he's the expert for the batteries. But I think this comparison of how batteries could ramp up their full load in less than 1 second is just brilliant, and this becomes a perfect segue for me to move into our next topic, that is battery storage. So, I mean, it's common knowledge that why battery storage is important, because you can store the renewable energy when it's cheap and it's available in abundance, and you can time shift the supply of this stored power to serve important grid services. Also, we've made massive strides in the battery costs. So in the last decade, when the standalone battery cost for lithium ion was somewhere around 1100, now it's at $137 per kilowatt hour. BNEF projects that this cost could even be further reduced by 45% to $58 per kilowatt hour. Lawrence Berkeley Lab of USA, they did another study to predict what would be the delivered cost of so the wholesale electricity price for solar plus storage in India. And the study was based on some of the auctions that were done in the United States, and the delivered cost of solar plus batteries could be as low as rupees 2.83 per kilowatt hour by 2030. These tariffs are 30 to 40% lower than what would be from a pithead coal-fired power plants. I would like to remind everyone that thermal power plants, the thermal power tariffs are inflationary in nature, as the variable costs of fuel and transportation haven't hiked every year. Also, one important point to highlight from IEA's India Energy Outlook: IEA expects India's battery storage capacity to be 140 to 200 gigawatt by 2040, largest for any country by a mile. When we talk about batteries, we have to talk about Australia. Now the world is looking at the Australian battery market, because there are major battery announcements every couple of weeks. So now all the states in Australia have massive utility scale batteries planned. And Australia, the beauty of Australian battery market is that it's driven by market economics. An important grid service called as a frequency control ancillary service, FCAS, is driving these auctions from utilities and state governments. Having hyped the Australian battery market, I have to say that United States wears the crown of king for the battery storage capacity. Now, at the end of 2020, United States battery capacity reached somewhere about 1.4 gigawatt, and only in third quarter of 2020, there were 500 megawatts of battery installation in United States. It's a massive acceleration of capacity deployment in the United States, and there are multiple large-scale batteries underway, which could be the largest in the world. Also, I spoke about solar plus battery storage and the declining tariffs. So the momentum in declining cost of solar plus batteries now has resulted into an ultra cheap levelized tariff for batteries, solar plus batteries. In United States now, the solar plus battery is available for US $22 per megawatt hour. Compared to India, the lowest just solar tariff for India is at $27. So you can imagine the deflation that has happened in the US solar plus battery market. So as we were comparing that India has a long way to go for batteries, but I don't think it's that far. We already have some initial starts with small scale utility scale batteries. We have one battery that's operated by Tata Power in their Delhi distribution system, which was developed by Fluence. And we also have another small scale battery with storage, 20 megawatts of storage plus 8 megawatt of battery storage that's being reportedly developed by L&T for the Andaman and Nicobar's isolated grid. So as I said, important to discuss some of the policies that would incentivize investment into these important technology. I think time of day pricing is the most important one. It's the starting point. We need to differentiate between peak and off-peak power supply. This sort of price signaling will incentivize capital investment into this expensive and important technologies, particularly for coal-fired power plants. I think the focus or the merit or the metric of the coal-fired power plants is too much dependent on the variable charges of coal-fired power plants. Lower the variable charge of coal-fired power plant, the plant gets dispatched first. But we also need to evolve towards a much more dynamic metric, which also takes account of flexibility of coal-fired power plants. And as IEA suggests that India could reach 140 to 200 gigawatt battery storage by 2040, it is very important that there is an evolution of a domestic value chain in India, and the Indian government must think of investing or incentivizing investment into lithium exploration, battery manufacturing, battery recycling, and battery replacement. Okay, green hydrogen. So I don't think green hydrogen is just a buzzword amongst the energy market enthusiasts. There is substance behind it, and the number one reason is hydrogen has wide range of applications from transportation, industrial production of ammonia, methanol, and steel, and there is also potential use in electricity storage. Now, number two is it's the momentum of declining costs of renewables, as well as declining costs of alkaline electrolyzer, which is the most common way of producing hydrogen from electrolysis of water. So the recent report from Terry suggests that these prices could come down by the electrolyzer cost could come down by 56%, and we could have a delivered cost of hydrogen per kg hydrogen at rupees 150, which is roughly below $2 US. As I said, I will try and look into the global markets and what's happening across the globe in these technologies. So there is massive momentum and there's billions of dollars poured into green hydrogen development. One of our report, Yong's report, suggested that the hydrogen production capacity could be 4,000 kilotons per annum by the end of 2030. And again, if you see, Australia is leading the way in terms of average hydrogen production capacity per plant, and there are head starts in Middle East, Europe, Asia, and North America. I would like to highlight some of these global projects. There are projects being developed across Australia, China, with the varying renewable energy capacity that could support hydrogen production. But I wouldn't get too much into these projects because Yong is our hydrogen expert, and he would be taking us through some of the details of these important projects. In terms of green hydrogen, we've had some sort of initial promise in the industry. So NTPC has come out and said that they are interested in developing green hydrogen And at the same time, we have large developers such as Adani and Greenco. They've announced partnership with Italian energy giant Snam to look into green hydrogen. So I would just like to summarize why I think green hydrogen is an important for India. So as I said, the momentum in green hydrogen is all because of availability of ultra cheap renewables. So if you look at the top 5 states, the top 5 renewable energy states of India, they have a cumulative target of 150 gigawatt by 2030. And there will be massive spill. When I say spill, there would be massive, substantial amount of power that would be generated, which the grid won't be able to take. This spill could be utilized to actually produce green hydrogen. So these top states who have ambition to build a cumulative of 150 gigawatt of 150 gigawatt of renewable energy, they could start looking into green hydrogen from now on. As I said, green hydrogen is a distant dream for India, but we need to plan in advance. Right now, as I said, there are billions of dollars poured into development of green hydrogen across the globe, and these major economies will take the cost of learning by doing, and India just needs to wait for the wave to arrive. And when the wave arrives, India needs to capitalize and create a green hydrogen economy. This would have advantage for its renewable energy fleet as well, because it reduces the curtailment risk, and it will allow India to decarbonize its economy, and at the same time it will allow strengthening of its energy security. So on that note, I would like to finish my slides and thank you, and looking forward to other panelists and the Q&A session. Thanks, Jyoti.
Thank you, Kashish, for setting up such an elaborate context for our discussion today and summarizing so well about our topic of discussion. And clearly from your findings, we could see that, battery is the most, effective solution. But before we talk about batteries, let's first talk about from, Mr. Farrukh, who's from Sterlite Power, which is a leading integrated power transmission developer and solution provider. So, Mr. Farrukh, with growing share of RE, what impact it is going to have on India's existing transmission infrastructure? What kind of challenges it will be there with growing share of RE, and what, according to you, what could be the possible solutions and how the situation can be handled and taken care of? Over to you, Farrukh.
Yeah, thanks, Jyoti. I hope I'm clear and audible.
Yes, you are.
So when you talk about transmission, and if you look at what Kashish presented, in none of his slides was transmission mentioned, right? He talked about battery prices going down. He talked about storage and solar prices going down, and he gave examples of what's happening in the world over. Transmission was not there very evident. The prime reason being it's taken. Is assumed that transmission will be there, and it's something which will not, without which you can't work, right? The power system, be it in any country, will not work. So it's a given infrastructure. And as what we in our company and in our context when we talk, we consider transmission as an infrastructure of infrastructure, because without transmission being there, none of the things that we are trying to achieve would be possible, be it flexing of coal, be it utilization of batteries, be it solar, storage, hybrid. All those things will work on a backbone, which is basically transmission, right? And transmission per se, by very nature, is kind of fixed cost element into the whole system, right? And then and you basically design it for peak capacities, right? And because it's a beautiful analogy in terms of looking at transmission with what circulatory system the human body has, right? You do have your veins and arteries running all through your body, moving the blood around. Similar fashion, you have this transmission network connecting the load centers with the generating centers and ensuring seamless flow of power, right? Just like if any artery gets blocked and we suffer a stroke or a heart attack or loss of power flow, exactly similar catastrophic impact is faced in this grid if any one link is not optimally designed or faces any congestion. So if you look at the way we have transitioned over the last 10, 15 years in the Indian context, from 5 independent operated regional grids, today we are seamlessly operating as a one single grid. That has happened because we did invest, we put up capacities which connected the regions to one another, and we no longer see any congestion pricing happening, or instances of congestion pricing per se, right? So the price which is discovered in a power exchange is a single price which is applicable for pan India, right? When you're looking at transmission from that perspective, integrating renewable to the overall grid, it becomes very important. And there are certain paradigm shifts which has happened. So if you look at the way transmission was planned earlier, it was basically more generation linked, thermal generation or hydro generation linked. So you had sufficient amount of time in terms of you knew when the thermal power plant is coming, you know where it is coming, and you know where that energy would be drawn from. So you had all the inputs in place, and a thermal plant, if it takes 5 years, and a hydro plant will take 7 to 8 years of generation, you have sufficient amount of time to lay down, plan your system, and ensure that by the time the generation is up, you have the transmission up and running. That paradigm has shifted now with RE coming in within 18 months to 24 months from the date of announcement. The transmission planning has to be more prospective in terms of you need to be aware where the generation is going to be coming in, right? So we do have the 5 top states in the country which are RE rich, and the whole policy of the government in exempting RE from paying any transmission charges, that has led to the most optimal resource areas with the highest insulations, the highest wind speeds to be tapped first, which has actually led to this 2 rupees tariff that we see today, right? Had this policy not been there, we would not have seen 2 rupees tariff. They would have factored in the transmission cost into it, and then you would have seen a very different dispersal of projects locations per se, which would be cognizant of the fact that where is the transmission cost also the lowest. That is one element which is not there today. But then, given these things in place, transmission, ultimately you will have to build in transmission for the peak capacity of what solar or wind plants will be there, and then eventually we'll keep on adding more flexible or storage capacities to these projects per se, and then you will see the utilization levels of these transmission systems going up. So right now, if I do a transmission line evacuating, for example, from Kutch region to the rest of the country, and it's solar based, then you would see a transmission line utilization being 20-25% depending on the CUF. But then you couple it with storage, you basically improve utilization of the transmission. And given that transmission is basically a fixed cost, so the more number of electrons flow, the more number of megawatts MUs flow, the per unit cost basically goes down, right? So that's very key per se for transmission. And given that it has to come up now within 18 months, which has not been done earlier, we had 36 months to do it. And even if you do it in 36 months, that was considered as a great achievement. Now to do a transmission project, 300, 400 kilometers of line, 765 kVs with all the ROW forest related issues is a huge challenge that the government has put forward to all the public and the private developers per se. Now, while to meet those challenges, there are certain basic things which needs to be in place. One, obviously, if you are planning ahead of time, you can always project and identify which are those regions which will be basically generation where generation will be coming in. Design the system, plan the system upfront, and start working on developing that particular network before the demand actually hits the ground. Right, that's one way of looking at it. There is this risk that what if generation does not come in that particular location, right? So you would have a situation where you have transmission assets built up, but then there is no generation, so it becomes a stranded asset. That has to go with better planning. And given the changes that the government is now talking of in terms of modifications to the standard bidding document for transmission, wherein CTU is the counterparty, right? So now the one big positive development that the government has done is segregate CTU, the central transmission utility, from power grid per se. So now the developer and the planner are two different entities, right? And CTU will be the whole and sole planning and signing authority for transmission systems. right? So now if you look at from the sector perspective, you have generators, RE generators, wind generators, who are basically applying for open access or long-term open access connectivity to CTU. And it is the CTU who is basically designing the whole system, planning the system. And once these are bid out, CTU is the one which is signing those agreements on behalf of all the users with the transmission developers. So now with this move, the whole all the elements of the sector are basically aligned together now, right? Earlier, that was very different. It was all disjointed. We had this issue of mismatch coming in. We had the issue of who is developing it, who is using it, and for whom, with whom are you going to sign the agreement? Now, all those pieces of the puzzle are coming in together, and with a robust planning in place, if a prospective planning in place, you would see transmission being the key link in basically evacuating low cost energy to the locations where it is required, right? Now so one is the other aspects in terms of forest clearance and wildlife clearances, right? There are specific guidelines from Ministry of Environment which tell what are the timelines to be adhered to for processing a forest clearance or for granting a wildlife clearance per se. Now, given that transmission projects are basically linear projects, they are exempt from the requirement of conducting an environment impact assessment per se. So that saves significant amount of time. But then the timelines which have been prescribed for even for getting forest clearances, they at times are equivalent to the timelines given for construction of projects. So now if I have to do a transmission project in 18 months, the timeline specified under the regulations itself or under the guidelines of MOEF itself are 18 months, right? So there has to be a strong support from the ministry and from the government per se to expedite and to ensure that the timelines are first of all adhered to, number one, because most of the cases that we have seen, the stipulated timelines themselves are not adhered to. Number two, if there is a possibility of crashing and crunching these timelines, then obviously that will be an added benefit to ensure that the transmission projects are ready and there when the transmission when the RE generation projects are ready. The other one that is getting difficult day by day is access to right of way. Right now, transmission lines have to go over somebody's land, right? And then while we don't procure that land, we don't acquire that land, like again, which is different from solar or wind power plants where you actually acquire the plant. We have to pay for them an excess charge, basically. Now that is getting scarce. That is getting very expensive, right? And plus, those are also guided by and what to say, controlled by the state governments per se, right? The state governments have to come up with compensation guidelines, which needs to be regulated, updated to reflect the market pricing. Now, all these things, if these are there in place and regularly followed, then the time delays that projects face would definitely get addressed, and then you will have transmission projects which are coming in time, within cost, to serve and connect the load and the generation per se. Now, if that happens, then overall the cost to serve to the people actually goes down, right? That becomes a important piece. One suggestion or one idea that can be looked at and can be adopted from a road sector or from an airport sector, for example, is that roads and airports have something called a state support agreement, right? So now, which basically is an agreement between the concessionaire and the state government and the Ministry of Roads, which basically enlists what kind of support would the state government extend to the concessionaire and NHAI for developing that particular project. And in the event that particular project that support is not available, then that is considered as an event of default by the state, and it is handled through the contractual framework, right? Similar thing is there for airports development also. So DIAL in Delhi has an agreement with Civil Aviation Authority. The airport at Hyderabad has an agreement with the state government of Andhra Pradesh. Bangalore has a similar agreement in place when it was developing. Now, these kind of supportive frameworks will definitely ensure that the time mismatch, the cost mismatch, the cost overruns, all these can be addressed and ensure that the projects come in time and is ready to serve to the people. one question which will keep eventually being raised is in terms of utilization of the transmission system per se. People would always say the transmission cost for an RE is 4 times what a normal thermal plant would be, because the PLFs are very different. But then that question and that logic is flawed, because you can't look at transmission from a utilization perspective. You have to look at it from a perspective, if it is there and if it is not there, what is the cost, right? We have seen 2 very recent examples of transmission failures. One was in Mumbai in October, and most recent in Texas. Now, the decisions were taken in the past which led to some situations today that they're facing. And it was in Texas, based on what little I have read, is that there's a lack of interconnection with other states. It is a decision that Texas took, that they would be islanded operating, and they would have a certain market structure to operate in, which led to that particular situation, right? Now, given the thought towards market that India has, and if people are familiar with what CRC has been pushing towards, CRC is pushing towards more market-based movement of energy, right? They're talking about schedule constrained economic dispatch. They're also talking now about market-based economic dispatch. That real-time market is already in place. There is also talk of letting green energy trade in exchanges. Now, to all that thing to happen, you need to have a network which is not congested, which is available to serve every electron to move across any part of the country, right? So eventually, from today's framework that we have, we would graduate and move to something called like general network access, wherein any person would basically put up a plant, plug and play into the transmission system per se, right? So that will become the bedrock over which all the markets that we're talking of, be it ancillary market, be it time of day market, everything will work on this particular bedrock. So then, and once this bedrock is created, we can always then address the issues of flexibility of grid. How do we manage coal? Where do we put up storage? Can we defer certain investments by putting in storage? Can we put in storage to basically shift the peak generation, increase the utilization of transmission system? All those things will happen once you have this bedrock in place per se, right? That's a bit from my side. I'll be happy to answer any questions going forward. Over to you, Jyoti.
Thank you, Farrukh. Those are very relevant concerns, I must say, that you have just mentioned in terms of timeline management, the utilization rate for transmission. I think those are very relevant points. And I think there is a lot of close coordination that's needed among various agencies to plan this thing for achieving that 450 gigawatt of RE capacity by 2030. We have a lot of follow-up questions for you, but we'll take that later on.
Okay.
Let's now, Mr. Rupam, I would like to know your views now. Mr. Rupam is representing Fluence Energy, a leading energy storage technology and service provider, and a JV of 2 big conglomerates, Siemens and AES. Mr. Rupam, you have heard from Mr. Farrukh what are the challenges, that a typical transmission infrastructure setup faces in India. In your opinion, how could standalone, battery energy storage solutions help address India these kind of challenges in, influx of large-scale variable renewables? And how are there any, global countries, other countries where we can take that as a benchmark, and maybe if we can take that as a success case studies? Over to you.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks for that question, Jyoti. And by the way, I must compliment both JNK and IEEFA. You have been kind of raising the bar on this discussion in the country. Your reports and your publications I follow very closely, and I think you always manage to bring new information to the table, which is always helpful. Because when you've been doing this for as long as I have, you often feel like it's the same day all over again. So thanks for that role that both of you have played. And thanks, Farrukh, for I think you've covered pretty much everything I had on my list from a transmission side. So I will stay clear of that. And just to give you a couple of other more challenges that are kind of more RE oriented and kind of get in the way of integrating more RE in the energy mix. So there are a couple of things, so let's look at what problems we are facing, right? So I think one problem we are facing, in addition to, all the issues with putting a transmission network in place, one core problem we are facing is that in our energy mix, we don't have as much RE as we would like, right? So we are still pretty much stuck with the same, low percentage of RE and a much higher percentage of, thermal, right? And thermal is staying steady. It's not giving up any space. Right? I think that's one big problem that we're facing. And then the second big problem we're facing is the need to have dispatchable power, right? I mean, as someone who has load responsibilities, you are always looking for dispatchable power, all right? Because in the evening, you don't have sun, where are you going to get power from, right? And there's a clear need of X megawatts of power, and you got to find that somewhere. And RE is not, giving you that option. Right. So those are, the two key issues that this whole integration of RE faces in the country. And I think, battery plays a very big role in a way it addresses both those problems, right? So one is, you can use that battery and you can charge it. So when you have abundant solar, quite like we were talking about hydrogen earlier, when you have abundant solar, you can charge it in these batteries. Right. And now when the solar is no longer available, you can then discharge the batteries. What you're doing is you're increasing the amount of kilowatt hours from RE in the energy mix. So you are hitting that first of those two problems. Right. And then the second thing, about dispatchable capacity, again, that same battery can then, give you firm power for a duration of time, from anywhere from 4 to 6 hours. Right. So when the sun is no longer available, the battery can then be used as dispatchable power for that time, between 6 to 10 when the demand peaks. And once you've taken care of that peak demand, you're back to a base load scenario, right? So what you've done is you have addressed the problem of firm power and the problem of not having enough RE in the mix by using batteries. So I will just kind of leave it at just those two simple concepts. In terms of who else is doing it, I think Kashish covered it really well. The US is doing it, Australia is doing it. I would add Indonesia to that mix as well. I mean, they're thinking of doing it. I would add South Africa to that mix as well. The more important thing is what is it that they're doing, all right? And what is it that we can learn from them? So basically what they're doing is, they're setting up these, and I'll just simplify this. So there's a lot more going on, but I'll simplify it. They're basically, simply speaking, setting up these 4-hour-long battery storage plants, right? And they're setting them up at existing thermal plants, right? In some cases, existing thermal plants. In most cases, retired thermal plants, right? So you have land, you have connectivity, and you're putting up the battery over there, and then you're charging it with abundant solar, and then you're discharging it into the evening peaks. That's essentially what these countries are doing, and that's I think, and that's a model that needs to be replicated in India as well. I'll stop my comment with that. I'll give you a chance to ask a follow-up question if you have any.
Yes, Rupam, I think that is such a relevant solution that you have just mentioned, setting up storage along with the thermal plants. But have you had any experiences in India where players are exploring this opportunity?
Yeah, no, certainly there are, not enough, but there are. And before I get to India, I'll just give you two examples. Just last week, we have commissioned a plant in Los Angeles. It's a 100 megawatt 4-hour plant. It's for the local distribution utility in Southern California. And it's located at what used to be a gas plant. And then we have another plant, which is a 300 megawatt 4-hour plant in Northern California. And that's in fact at an existing gas power plant where they have decommissioned one of those turbines, and the space has been used to accommodate a 300 megawatt battery storage power plant. So that's what's happening around the world. And there are many projects across the world, in many of the countries we talked about where this is happening. In India, there are things going on, and I think what we need to do is, and I'll kind of try to cover two questions here. Like I said, more needs to be done. So Farrukh talked about the project, the issue in Mumbai, right? Big load center had an outage. They should absolutely look at a battery storage plant to service the Mumbai load, right? That's one thing. I think, and they are, but we need to put more energy behind it. And then same thing Delhi needs to do as well. Again, Delhi, big load center, has issues integrating new RE, and I think Delhi should be thinking of a standalone battery storage plant as well. And I would add just one more mixed place to the mix, basically state of Rajasthan. And the reason being because they have a lot of RE potential. They have huge RE goals. And they have their 3 big load centers, Jaipur being one of them. I think Rajasthan also needs to look at standalone battery storage to service one of their 3 big load centers, preferably Jaipur. And again, if they want to, basically address this huge RE potential that the state has.
Thanks, Rupam, for giving that quick updates. I think those are very relevant, points that you mentioned. There might be a few more follow-up questions with you, Rupam, but before we go on to that, let's talk about green hydrogen as well now. We have Mr. Yongliang from IEEFA, who will be sharing some of the insights from global markets, how hydrogen has been critical for our topic of discussion today. Over to you, Yong.
Thank you, Jyoti. Okay, so just sharing my screen. Okay, so thank you. This presentation comes from a report that Tim Buckley and myself developed in the second half of last year. That was when there were a lot of green hydrogen project announcements coming up, almost every week. And so that was also when the EU launched its big hydrogen roadmap. So a lot of excitement. And so this report is a synthesis of the underlying developments behind the hydrogen industry, and then also taking a look at whether there's going to be enough supply to meet all that demand. So just to take you through some of the slides, this is a bit of our background, and I think this is a very famous slide. This is the miracle of renewable energy price reduction, and this is what has made everything possible. I think we're all quite aware of this. And also obviously in India, tremendous progress in the last couple of years, and we're seeing the companies create tremendous value from this, and we hope that this is going to be a good example for other companies to follow, and it proves the point that green energy, it's profitable, it's good for the climate, everyone gets rich from it. Good deal all around. Okay, now on to hydrogen, green hydrogen. So this is the fuel of the future. Yeah, it was the fuel of the future 30 years ago, and today it is again the fuel of the future. But this time everything has changed because of the falling cost of renewable energy. That is what has made all of this possible. And you can see from this schematic that basically hydrogen can be used as an energy form for almost all sorts to replace all sorts of fossil fuel energy. In every single sector, it's possible for hydrogen to replace it. On this slide, you can see that this time, people are talking not just about hydrogen. We're starting to see a lot of green ammonia projects coming up as well, and also starting to see, let's say, for example, Maersk, they announced they're going to start e-methanol ships. And this is another technology from where you can use green hydrogen and combine with carbon captured CO2 to produce carbon neutral methanol. So what we are seeing is this explosion of the many forms of energy that hydrogen can be used. And it's because each of these different modes have the different pluses and minuses. So we think that, all these new technologies, they just give users many more options. And it really just, all of this more options means that there's a higher probability of green hydrogen achieving mass adoption. Now, I think that the issue of hydrogen, we have to just touching on its main characteristics, is that hydrogen's main benefit is that it has high energy density. So it's actually quite comparable with the fossil fuel, and it's of course much lighter than a battery. But on the flip side, the problem is that hydrogen is not energy efficient. It has very low energy efficiency. Up to 22% of the final energy is used, is captured, and you get a 78% energy loss from all the conversion and transportation, etc. So this is the biggest problem that green hydrogen faces. And I think that's one of the reasons why we see, batteries actually making very fast inroads. You saw from the numbers that Kashish showed in Australia. And I think also what Mr. Rupam was talking about as well. But there's still a lot of room for hope. So I think these are some of the sectors where we see green hydrogen having a very big impact, and where it's certainly going to have to play a role. So these are the emissions that you can see. Let's say for ammonia, the gray bar is what you get from normal fossil fuel, from natural gas, and then the lower bars are what you get from green ammonia. So you see that's the kind of GHG reduction that we're going to see. And let's say in the case of ammonia, this is only going to be possible when you use green hydrogen. This is just chemically necessary. And so when you think about it, ammonia is a 230 million ton per annum product globally. 230 million tons of ammonia is produced every year, right? And we know the formula is NH3, so you can work out how much hydrogen you're going to need. It is a mind-boggling number. Let's take green steel, for example. So this is another case where you are absolutely chemically going to need hydrogen to reduce iron ore to DRI. You take about 50 kilograms of hydrogen is necessary for 1 ton of steel. So we know that roughly global steel production today is about 1.9 billion tons, right? And so blast furnace is about 60-70% of that. So we work out that green hydrogen, just for green steel, it's going to be in excess of 60 million tons required by 2050 to decarbonize steel. So 60 million tons, it is quite mind-boggling, because the numbers so far, as I'll show you later, are nowhere near that level. Okay, so I think everyone here is quite familiar with the gray, blue, and green hydrogens. This is just to show you that in 2020, green hydrogen is nowhere near economically viable yet. So to give you the rough approximation, if you were to do green steel today with green hydrogen at this cost, you would need a carbon tax of about $300 to $400 per ton on steel to make it viable with green steel, for green steel to be viable. So that's just not going to happen. So we do need the green hydrogen prices to rapidly decline. And that's where we see this again. If you look at this chart, you'll see that, hey, this actually looks pretty similar to what we saw with solar and wind. And the key to this is getting the electrolyzer capacity to a much higher level, right? So today we have electrolyzers at 5 megawatts or 10 megawatts, but we need to get it to maybe 20, hundreds even better. Now, I think most recently, I think it was last week, I think that the Italian refiner Saras, they announced that they're going to partner with Enel to build green hydrogen at their refinery in Italy using a 20 megawatt electrolyzer. And so this plant will probably be ready in 2024-25. So that's actually fitting quite nicely with the timeline set out in this graph. So it is actually quite possible, and projects are coming out, and we can see the evidence that the decline in the hydrogen costs, it's quite real. And in all likelihood, given what we have seen in the past, with the accelerated pace of changes these days, I think there's a reasonable probability that we'll hit the $2 per kilogram target by the end of this decade. And I think that's the magic mark where everything starts to happen, right? It's the same with solar power, reaching that magic mark of grid parity and below. And so $2 by the end of this decade. Famous last words, we'll see. So I think, it's one of the reasons why hydrogen is getting a lot of excitement is that we are seeing like a huge number of headlines, like, almost on a daily basis. And I think the one that really captures the imagination is Fortescue, and they want to build 235 gigawatt of capacity, and I'm sure you understand how crazy that number is. For China, that we all know that we need China to play a big role in this game because of its size, it's what's needed to get it to economies of scale. So now we see Sinopec planning to build 1,000 hydrogen refueling stations. And we have POSCO. POSCO is one of the biggest steel makers in the world, and they have committed to a net zero 2050 target. And they have published a very clear pathway towards reaching that. And hydrogen is a very big part of that because they have penned in green steel as the method of reaching this. And they have 5 million tons. So actually, again, 5 million tons, as I'll show you later, it's actually a very, very big number. And of course, here in India, Mr. Ambani has promised to build this hydrogen transportation fuel system. And given what he's pulled off with Geo, one cannot discount all these big ambitions anymore. He's proven us all wrong. Now, so if you remember, some of the very big numbers that we talked about earlier. So this is actually what has been concretized so far. This is actually what has been firmed up so far. So we did we amalgamated all the projects that have come out. And what we find is that there are about 60 viable green hydrogen projects up to now. And the problem is that they only have about 4 million tons of hydrogen capacity by the end of this decade. So if you look, if you go back to earlier slides, you'll see that this is just simply not enough. We need 60 million just for green steel. POSCO alone is talking 5 million. Fortescue alone is talking a multiple much bigger than this. So we know that for this hydrogen ambition to come to fruition, we are going to need a lot more effort than what we're seeing today. So I think that in this respect, so far, we have to monitor what's going on in Europe very closely because their efforts have been the dominant effort so far in the world. And by far, they are leading the world in their hydrogen ambition, far ahead of South Korea, far ahead of Japan. Now, the reason for Europe doing this is quite simple. They are planning to jumpstart the post-COVID economy, and they are intending to replace the fossil fuel economy with a green hydrogen economy. And this is going to create, the plan is to create lots and lots of new jobs, a global leading industry. And you can see that they've learned their lesson from the solar and wind debacle, and they are now planning to home grow this industry. And so some of these numbers that you can see again, very, very significant. And this graph here is just to visualize for you the kind of expansion that we are going to need. So today, 2020, this is the amount of electrolyzer capacity globally. Right, it's nothing. But to fully decarbonize, and that's the 5 terawatt 2050 target, you're going to need 400 gigawatt of capacity deployment per year, right? So it's really hard to comprehend. 0 to 400. I think that's actually the title of this report. I think energy transition on this scale has never really happened before. Not in such a short period of time. So it will be very, very interesting to see. And just quickly, I think I have to wrap up soon. But there's a lot of good reasons for why hydrogen is top on the list. It's because it is all the infrastructure is already in place for hydrogen, and it basically means by adopting hydrogen, we can reuse the fossil fuel infrastructure, and so that avoids the stranded asset problem, and it also gives all these new assets a new lease of life. And I think not forgetting really. What we see here is that the entire North Asia has gone net zero, and we all know that that is something that is almost by definition going to necessitate some degree of hydrogen use, simply because countries like Japan and South Korea do not have the renewable resources. They do not have sufficient irradiation. They do not have sufficient wind. So they will need to import green energy, and I think green hydrogen fits the bill. And really, I think for China, I think in the next 2 weeks, the 14th five-year plan will be coming out, and we are eagerly awaiting to see whether hydrogen is going to be a big part of this process. They are promised to invest 100 trillion renminbi in the next 30 years to decarbonize. So again, these kind of numbers, I think it's probably the biggest investment sum that we'll see in our lifetimes. And as far as projects go, I think that Australia is the most ambitious. They are planning the biggest plans, but Europe is actually having the most number of projects. And I think by all accounts, Europe's actually leading the way in hydrogen projects. When you look at the project on a more microscopic detail, you'll see that actually in Europe, it's most of the projects are very carefully planned. They all already have customers in place, and in many cases it's being led by oil majors, very credible companies who have also like Shell just published net zero plans. So we think that Europe is going to take the lead in this. Australia has the biggest potential to service Asia, but many of those projects are still on the drawing board. And we think a lot more work needs to go there. So I think Kashish has gone through the rest of the slides, and I think my 10 minutes is up. So I think I will leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yong, for summarizing it so well. And clearly the targets that the countries have given are quite ambitious. But yes, utilizing the existing fossil fuel network makes a good business case for hydrogen. But I think it's still far from in terms of cost economics are not making sense right now. But yeah, I think activity has started taking place in that sense. So before we move to our question answer session, I just wanted to ask one question to both Farrukh and Rupam. That is on the policy side. Farrukh, I would like to know your views. What kind of policy interventions do you think are needed right now to manage the kind of concerns that you have raised earlier in your remarks?
Right. So on policy side, especially towards development, so I'll break it into two. So you need some policy interventions toward development of these particular assets. Another one is in terms of how do you address the cost and the recovery of cost and aspects like that. So there are two, because development is one, recovery of cost is also becomes another very important part of it. So in terms of development, obviously the CTU, CA, they all have a very robust planning system in place. Right, and there is a strong cadence, if I may call, which has been put up, wherein at various levels across the country, right from regional level to the national level, transmission systems are planned, and they are proposed for development, and then they are developed either on the competitive bidding route or the regulated tariff mechanism route. There's a whole process which is there, which goes into planning, and there's a lot of input which comes in from where the RE generation is coming in, where have CTU been receiving requests for connectivity and connectivity to the grid. So all those aspects get in, and you get to know where the system is going to come in. The one place where more work needs to be done is in terms of coordination, right? Both from the generation side and the development side, and an overall monitoring framework at least the ministry level. Right, there are mechanisms in place which are having, they need to be strengthened, and any amount of review does not is always helpful, right? So at what pace are the generating projects coming in? At what pace are the transmission projects coming in? And can we address issues before they become bottlenecks, right? While there's a whole mechanism in terms of how there's a monthly monitoring which is happening at CA level, which goes up to the MOP level, and then if it is critical, the highest level being the Pragati portal at the Ministry of at the PMO level. Now all those procedures are there, but the thing is, it needs to be more proactive, given that we are moving towards a target which is very ambitious, number one. So if it's extremely ambitious, then you need to be prepared for meeting that particular transmission targets per se, right? That's on the development side, right? So now, if you could streamline, now this is an ask which both the RE industry has and even the transmission industry has. That right now nobody has a clear idea in terms of pipeline of projects, right, or pipeline of tenders. While SECI has a given target and looking at how much has been constructed, what is under construction, how much has been bid out, and what is remaining, we do know that around 25,000 additional gigawatts of 25,000 megawatts of solar and wind projects have to be bid out. But then are these bids going to come up every month, every 3 months, 6 months? Nobody knows those aspects. Similarly, in transmission also, we do have planning happening, running all through the year, and we have projects being awarded once in a year, twice in a year, thrice a year, with no specific cadence or schedule per se. So now, if you can get the planning more scheduled, if we have this pipeline more in place, then the mismatches, the delays will definitely get addressed. The other part where policy has to look at in terms of how do we recover cost of all these transmission systems from the users per se. So right now, we do have the new regulations in place, the sharing regulations 2020 in place. They do have bucketed the cost into 4 main heads: national component, regional component, transformer component, and the usage-based component. It basically splits the transmission cost into a fixed cost component and a usage-based cost component, kind of a thing. And then there also, that's a evolution in the earlier from the earlier point of connection mechanism, and it's a good evolution. People now know exactly for what assets they are paying how much. That will help. There's an issue. The issue which these regulations had was in terms of what happens in terms there is a mismatch between a generator and a transmission system coming in. Who bears that particular cost, right? So the earlier the way regulations are drafted right now, or laid down right now, is the entity which delays basically is supposed to pay for those transmission costs, right? Now that particular position has a history, because that's what CRC had stated in these various past orders, which now they have captured in these regulations. Now, basically what it means is, if a solar project is delayed, for example, and transmission has come up, then it is a solar project which will basically pay for those transmission charges for this particular transmission asset. And similarly, if the transmission is delayed, then transmission will basically first provide an alternate route for that solar project to evacuate its power, or if the route is not available, then compensate him by paying off the transmission charges that they would pay, right? It is not equitable, but that's the best case solution that is there. Now, in January, Ministry of Power had issued a directive, which many of you would be knowing, wherein they said, no, the transmission system is basically a system plan for the country, and it has to be borne and shared by everyone, right? So that's the solution that the ministry has pushed forward to and directed the CRC to amend its regulations. So now a transmission system which is planned as part of the overall system, right, with identified generator, for example, but then ultimately it is part of a whole mesh. So now the cost, once I'm commissioned and I have met the contractual requirements of my concession agreement, then I should be permitted to recover my tariffs through the POC pool per se, right? So that's the transition that will happen. That is expected to happen with the CRC working on the amendments. The other aspect is in terms of what next. Where do we move from here, right? So the next movement per se is picking up general network access regulations once again. These were issued in 2017. A lot of work had gone up, and they were put forth in they were not, and they were put into cold basket per se. Now, if you are going to see more transactions happening, more market-based transactions happening with MBED, RTM, and the possibility of green energy coming into exchange and being transacted, then we need to move and evolve into a access network or access regime which permits anyone to connect and use the system and pay for that particular usage per se. So that's the next policy development that we foresee will happen. It would take at least a year, 2 years to basically concretize and get rolled out. That's from my side.
Thank you, Farrukh. I think those are very critical points and regulations that need to be, streamlined before we take such a big leap of RE addition in our portfolio. Rupam, same question basically, but from how to drive battery energy storage solutions in India. According to you, what are the critical policy interventions that are needed right now, which are missing, still missing?
Yeah, so I'll talk about what's where we have seen progress, and I'll contrast where more needs to be done. So if you look at SECI leading the RE projects, and SECI kind of championing RE projects and attracting a lot of foreign investment, they've done a lovely job of ramping up the RE capacity in the country, and as an extension of that, they've done a good job of bringing in storage into their project mix as well, right? And I think what we've seen is we have seen more standards for storage. We have kind of more policy for storage, only to enable the projects that SECI is bringing to the country, right? So I think we've seen and I would kind of categorize that at the central level, right? So I would say there are things happening at the central level. Could more be done? I think absolutely more could be done. But at least we have a couple of projects that have been auctioned, that have been contracted, and they're offering firm capacity where it's RE plus storage, right? I think we need to focus at the state level now, okay? Especially because our context here is standalone storage. At the central level, the ISTS works fairly well. We don't have the kind of problems that they faced in the US last week with the lack of national connectivity. So I think our problems are more at the state level, right? And I'll go back to what I said earlier. I think what we need is some of the states, and I'm just putting Delhi, Maharashtra, because they both have the biggest load centers in the country, and Rajasthan, because Rajasthan has the most RE potential in the country, solar potential in the country. I think for those two reasons, I think all the three states should start developing DPRs for standalone battery storage projects. They should petition their regulatory commissions with those DPRs and let the regulatory commissions evaluate, right? And we've done this, in about 20 countries around the world at this point so far. And when those regulatory commissions look at the value that the battery storage is adding to the mix, whether it's from a transmission point of view, whether it's from an RE integration point of view, whether it's from reducing greenhouse gas emissions point of view, whether it's from an energy transition point of view, they will be surprised by how much the batteries can do, right? What we cannot do is, so I think that's what we got to do at those state levels, right? I think that's where our focus should be. What we cannot do is just wait for that perfect solution to show up, because I'll let you in a little secret, okay? In the Delhi project, right, the battery is dispatched through software. It's tied to the main power management system at the control room of the distribution company, and there's a software that calls in the battery. But the battery is also called a lot over a phone call, right? So there's somebody sitting in the control room who makes a phone call to a guy sitting, the operator at the battery, and says, give me 5 megawatts for the next 15 minutes. Give me 10 megawatts for the next 15 minutes. Now, we may think of that as a very primitive way of doing things, but guess what? That's exactly what California does. Even in California, there's somebody sitting there calling somebody with a battery saying, can you dispatch your battery an hour later, right? That's exactly what's happening over there as well. So I don't think we have to wait for that perfect solution to come to us and then we will deploy it. I think innovation is happening fast, change is happening fast. The hardware is the same. We just have to make sure that it does the things that we want it to do, right? And I think that is where our strength is as well. You know, in getting it to the point where you know, it works the way it should work. I think that's something that India can do just as well as as anyone else can. I mean, specifically from a software point of view, right? Now, in terms of like some, you know, specific tangible asks, I think we got to put the batteries on a lower GST slab. I think we got to put batteries on a 5% GST slab. And the other thing I want to add is Niti Aayog is trying to do a lot of work to create demand for batteries because batteries is a big, as part of the EV push, because the batteries is a big part of an EV cost, right? I would say that if you do one battery storage project, grid connected megawatt scale battery storage projects, you can create as much demand for batteries that's equivalent to thousands of EVs, right? Plus you will do it for a social cause, right? It's not will be for just the one person who drives the EV, it will be for the society as a whole, right? So I think to create that demand, grid connected megawatt scale standalone batteries connected, you know, would be the perfect launch vehicle to create that demand in the country for batteries, with which we can then bring in the manufacturing capacity and with which we can then lower prices, right? And to get there, if we need viability gap funding, I'm saying there are many projects that don't need viability gap funding in India right now, but there could be projects that need it. I think Niti Aayog should target that viability gap funding towards such projects so that we can enable them in the short term and then create the demand for batteries in the country.
Thank you, Rupam.
Yeah, Jyoti, if you would permit me to add to what Rupam said.
Sure.
Sorry, thanks. Yeah. So at the state level, for example, right, what Rupam was referring to. Now, the state, there are regulations which require you to present to the regulator and get approved your power procurement strategy, right? What would be, which are the sources that you're going to get that power from, right? And then the DISCOMs just presented. Right now, we don't hear about energy storage in that strategy per se, right? So that has to start happening at the state level. They need to start looking at that RE integration at my state is giving me challenges in managing my grid, right? So you need to then start looking at localized solutions. That's what Rupam is indicating to. That states like Gujarat, states like Rajasthan, where there is so much of variation because of RE, and all this RE is basically feeding the country, not just the states of Gujarat and Rajasthan per se. But then they need to start talking and putting those proposals up. What is my state's optimal generation mix? We did have one report from CEA which talked about optimal mix at the national level, right? Now we need to percolate that thing, granularize that thing at the state level, identify what is the requirement, where do we put it in, and then, as he said, we need to start with one or two projects per se to actually realize, yes, there is benefit at it. Where do we put it up? What sizing, and how do we basically recover those costs? Because ultimately, these costs would be recovered through either a reliability charge in as part of the grid usage charge, or it could be offset through higher DSM, lower DSM costs. It could be various value streams which will come in, but unless you take that leap and do it, you will not be able to figure out what it is.
Right, Farrukh, Rupam. I also agree with that. First step needs to be taken, at least at the state level, so that we can move on in the right direction. So before we wrap up our session today, I would now quickly ask my fellow panelist Kashish to take quickly on question answer session from the audience here. Kashish.
Yeah, sure, Jyoti. Yeah, I've been there are quite a few questions, and I've been reading through those questions and also trying to pay attention to all the presentations and comments. So I think there were a lot of questions for the battery side, and I think Rupam has done a wonderful job of actually encapsulating all the issues and tangible asks and everything. But there were a lot of questions around costs of batteries. So if I may ask Rupam a question about, as you said, SECI has done a wonderful job of starting to incorporate battery storage in the auctions, and the last auction, if I remember, the peak power supply was somewhere around $65 to $70. that was the resulting tariff for peak power supply. So do you have any flavor of how, I think it's expensive, and do you have any flavor of how it could reduce, and what is the time frame that we are looking at in terms of reduction of these costs or landed wholesale tariffs?
Yeah. You know, there is a shocking lack of recognition of what are we spending on the power system right now. You know, and I think we have to compare what we are saying would be spent on batteries compared to what you're spending on it right now, right? Both from a fixed cost and the variable cost perspective, right? What I've seen is that no one's, you know, the way you operate on a day-to-day, right? What happens is your fixed cost goes into your background, right? You don't even think about it, right? So when I speak to a policymaker, only thing they think they're spending on an existing resource is the variable cost. They want me to compare me to the 2 rupees or 2 rupees 50 or 3 rupees that they're spending on coal power, right? For them to realize that, okay, there's a fixed cost that goes out for the next 25 years, you know, for them, that's like, oh, hang on. Is that something that I incur, right? So no, granted that, you know, people are tied into a long-term PPA and you can't get out of those. So saying that I'm going to displace that fixed cost with battery and now my battery is in play, maybe it's not viable. But let's look at the increase in somebody asked a question about, you know, demand, right? So demand is increasing, you know, in our cities. You know, I was surprised there are substations in Delhi where demand year on year is increasing by 30%, 30, right? So demand is increasing, right? We have to go and secure power for that increasing demand. And what we need to do is we want to make sure that we don't get all of that capacity from thermal. We at least get the absolute peaking capacity, we get it from battery with solar. And I think those are the opportunities that we need to target. You know, I think there's too much focus on round the clock power and using battery to RTC. Again, you know, we will, that's not the right place to start. The right place to start is to capture those absolute peaks and see if you can share that peak with a battery. And that way you are not doing, you're not signing any more long-term PPAs for thermal power, and you're integrating more RE into your energy mix.
Right, great. Yeah, Rupam, I would agree. You know, the long-term PPAs, thermal PPAs with their fixed charges, the sunk cost, that's kind of infecting the whole system. It's not allowing, discoms are bleeding money with every unit of power they sell, and it's also not allowing easily allowing other technologies to come up and, you know, support RE integration. So yeah.
And why would, in this scenario, why would anyone think of signing one more PPA with a gas or a coal plant is beyond comprehension. I think it's criminal. I think we should ban it. No one should be allowed to sign any more PPA. You know, for all your you know, future energy needs, going and signing a coal or a gas PPA for all of those needs should be criminalized. You know, they should sign up some of that capacity with battery with solar, because again, if you put that in the context of our RE goals, I mean, if you just look at the Rajasthan example, right? They got about 5 gigawatts of solar right now. They have goals to be 30 gigawatts of solar by 2025. That's what their policy says. They can barely accommodate the 5 gigawatts they have right now. You know, all their entire coal fleet is running at technical minimum, and they're buying power in the exchange. And they're talking of going from 5 to 30 when they can't even accommodate the 5, right? Why should they, you know, go and sign up more gas and coal PPAs? It makes absolute no sense.
Yes, I would agree, and I would go as far as to saying not sign new PPAs, but also start looking at retiring old and inefficient coal-fired power plants. What the good sign is that there is some momentum in terms of retiring coal-fired power plants, and we've seen about 500 to 600 megawatt already being retired year to date from April to February. So yeah, I think that's what sort of I had in my mind in terms of questions. That's sort of encapsulating all the questions that I've been seeing.
Ye-
So yeah, I think Jyoti, I think
Yes,
we're good
thank
in
you.
terms of questions.
Yeah. There is one more question I think that is again for Farrukh I have, which is not on the big scale, utility scale renewable plants. There is a huge target of 40 gigawatt of rooftop solar as well. Do you think that will have a significant, implication on existing transmission infrastructure and since we are seeing that discoms are, introducing very regressive policies to counter all these things, but what is yours say on that? And that will be, I think, my last question for this session, and we can wrap up after that.
So the market and the demand projections are large enough for all to exist per se, is what I say, right? So there is this uh, question which always comes in: if rooftop solar takes off, then do we need large concentrated solar parks evacuating power from there to load centers? So no, given the scale that we are at today and the projected scale that we would be, as you yourself mentioned, will be around 900 gigawatts in 2025, 2050 or so. Right now, all that cannot be only rooftop, and all that cannot be just large solar parks. It will be a mix of both, right? And eventually, because your demand is definitely increasing, and you keep and as the economy becomes more electrified, you need more electricity to basically run it. Now, where you get in is the question, right? Where and from what source per se. So rooftop definitely will have its own space to play, and large solar parks, large wind parks, hybrid with storage will also continue to have it. Will have its own place per se. There's no threat that rooftop possesses towards what do you say transmission per se, because eventually it moves by displacement, right? And you need to have sufficient network to let that displacement happen, right? So that's my point of view on rooftop solar.
Thank you, Farrukh. I think thank you everyone to all the panelists for joining us for the webinar today. Those are very wonderful insights and very relevant questions and concerns that were raised in the discussion today. Thank you very much for to be part of it. Thank you everyone to all the attendees as well who were through it for almost 1.5 years with us, half hours with us, sorry. The recording of the session will be available on our website shortly. Thank you everyone. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.